Welcome. Hi to everybody. Absolutely fantastic to have so many of you with us. We're expecting over 120 participants today, so that's very exciting. My name is Sarah Patterson-Hamlin. I'm the CEO and dishwasher of the UpsideDowns Education Trust. If you're not familiar with our work, we provide speech and language therapy funding to children with Down syndrome in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I currently have some orthodontics in my mouth, which is why I sound a little strange. So if anyone's having trouble understanding me, just let me know. I'm told it's pretty intelligible by a speech therapist, so I feel like that's a qualified opinion. I'll do some housekeeping in a minute, but for now I'm just going to hand over to my wonderful co-host to introduce herself, Sandra.
Kia ora everyone and welcome, and I can see people from all around the country, so that's really exciting. I'm Sandra Vicarino from the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association. I'm the National Executive Officer and a parent of a young man who's 26 with Down syndrome. He's married to a wonderful woman called Rachel, who also has Down syndrome. So speech, I'm really excited about the session this evening, and so thank you to Fiona and to Sarah that we can do this for all our families as well. And so just a quick thing for me to share, we're doing quite a few things online at the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association at the moment to connect people. So please go to our Facebook page or link into our website and you'll see all the events. You can sign on, membership is free. But if I can just quickly run through some of the things, we had a vaccine session with Dr. Rosemary Marks and Marguerite Dalton and Geraldine Watnell on Sunday, and that is going to be available online for you to view. But we are going to do another follow-up session on Wednesday the 8th at 7:30, where we should view the video and then come with your question and answers, but we're also going to do a little bit around how to prepare someone if they're a little bit hesitant about having the vaccine, just scared of needles. Some other sessions, we're realising to do some wellbeing sessions. So we're doing a fun one called No Worries, and that's going to be on Tuesday the 7th at 3 p.m. We normally just have a meeting with families with younger children, but this session we're going to do on wellbeing. So look out for that as well. And we're also doing one on Thursday the 9th on emotional regulation, which is at 12:30, and again at 8:30, and then we do our regular Friday cocktail evening at 5, Monday for people with Down syndrome at 7, and then the Wednesday at 3, Tuesday at 3 o'clock. So please just watch for our Facebook page so you can see all of those events that are happening. And I'd like to hand over to the wonderful Fiona.
Thanks, Sandra. Well, thank you for having me here this evening. It's very exciting. When Sarah from the UpsideDowns Trust said, would you like to come and give an online speech therapy session for some families, speech therapy they can DIY at home, I thought that'll be lovely. We might have about 20 families. I think we have about 130 registered. So this is going to be interesting, but it is fantastic to be here. So yes, I'm Fiona Kenworthy, private speech and language therapist, and I run small talk therapy in Auckland, and I do contract into the Ministry of Education, so I've had a little bit of crossover there. I've been a speech therapist for 20 years, so I'm New Zealand trained, postgrad studies over in the UK, and have worked in lots of different environments, so we'll be drawing on some of that experience tonight. Back to you, I think, Sarah.
Awesome, thank you so much, team. So before we get going with Fiona's presentation, I'll just run through a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, a big thank you to Scarlatti and Adam Barker, who have donated their Zoom webinar capabilities to us. And another big thank you to Paul Smith, my former colleague at the Helen Clark Foundation, who has helped us a lot with the technical side of things and who is hosting this evening in terms of the technical side. Thank you, everyone who signed up. So excited to see. We've got teachers, we've got teacher aides, we've got speech therapists, we've got parents, whānau, and anyone else that hasn't come under any of those categories. Thank you for joining us tonight. It's a Tuesday evening and we've all had long days, so we really appreciate it. I'll just explain the webinar format. So as you'll have discovered, you can only see and hear the three of us, and we cannot see or hear you. there's a couple of reasons for that. One is with so many attendees, it just means that the Q&As are going to be easier for us to manage. The other reason is your privacy, because this is being recorded and will be made public. So just bear note of that. If you want your question to remain anonymous, there is an option for you to do that. So yeah, just be aware of that. In terms of how it's going to run, I'll hand over once I've finished doing this to Fiona, who will present for about 10 to 15 minutes on some speech and language therapy techniques you can employ with your young person with Down syndrome on lockdown. And after that, we will have a good long chunk of time, about 40 minutes for question and answer. So that the bulk of the session really will be in this format. Now, if you hover your mouse down over the screen down the bottom so that all the options come up, you'll notice there's an option for Q&A as well as an option for chat. You've all been using the chat function brilliantly so far, and it's wonderful to see you all. Hello. And we've got a hello from an older sister to a person with Down syndrome and an SLT student at Canterbury, which is awesome. So the chat function, feel free to use it for things like that. If you have questions to put to us, please use the Q&A function to do that, and that's how we'll be managing it. And you can pop those in at any stage. You don't have to wait for the Q&A section. So if something comes up while Fiona's talking that it triggers a question for you, then do feel free to do that. Your questions can be to any of the three of us, but just make sure that they're on the topic of speech and language therapy for children with Down syndrome, or people with Down syndrome. That's all we ask, really. Afterwards, we will be sending you a survey. It will take 2 minutes or less to fill out. We'd really appreciate your engagement with that. This is the first for certainly for UpsideDowns, and as you can hear, Sandra is very pro at the webinars and Zoom opportunities, but this is a new format for NZDSA as well, and for Fiona. So any feedback you can provide would be really, really valuable, and we'll also send a link to the recording afterwards. So I think you've heard enough from me for now. I will now mute myself and pass over to Fiona to give her presentation.
Okay, thanks so much, Sarah. Yes, absolutely. Any feedback offered would be really, really helpful. So I've got about 15 minutes tonight to share some speech therapy thoughts, tips, tricks. So I've got 3 parts that I'm going to do. I'm going to start by telling you why I think communication is such a big deal for young people with Down syndrome and why speech therapy is important. Then I'm going to share with you 4 of the things that the parents of my most successful communicators do. So the kids who are the closest to reaching their communication potential. And then I have a language activity that maybe you might be able to try out at home, something that you can take away. Why is communication so important? Well, I know that to some degree I'm preaching to the choir because you've all put your time aside tonight to come and join us. So in the short term, as you know, you want your children to be able to make friends, to be able to express what they need, to understand what's going on around them. We also need them to be able to communicate well so they can access the curriculum to the best of their ability. But it's not just the short-term stuff. How well children learn to communicate early on affects the whole trajectory of their lives. So we know that people who go on to communicate well, people with Down syndrome, they are more likely to be in paid employment as adults. They are more likely to live independently. They're more likely to have a life partner, and mental health is more likely to be much better as they have better social circles. So communication is really, really essential. It's important to start early on if possible, but it's never too late. Professor Sue Buckley from Down Syndrome International over in the UK, she recommends coming back again and again and working on different aspects of speech therapy needs, communication needs, right up and through the teens. They've noticed over there in their studies that young people who use different systems like signing or visuals to communicate, of those ones, the ones who do have a little bit of verbal language, they will usually choose that and ditch the visual communication tools further down the track. So it's really important we keep coming back and working on spoken language. The next part, the 4 things that the parents of my most successful communicators do. So this part is not evidence-based. This part is just my experience as a clinician and what I've seen work well. The first one is that the parents I work with are the team leader. They assume the unofficial role of the team leader. So they have the greatest invested interest in their child and the most expertise around that particular child. When I say parent, it's more thinking holistically. That's actually whoever the person with the closest, strongest relationship with the child is. But that person becomes proactive and learns about speech therapy. They become engaged, try to stay positive, keep communicating and collaborating with the team. And those kids, their kids, really have much better outcomes. Public and private speech therapists, accessing both. It's people who access whatever's available to them. I think there'll be a bit more opportunities to talk about public-private therapy further down the track, but finding out what's out there and being persistent and polite and asking for services. And the 4th thing, sorry, someone's got no audio there. I'll leave that with Paul to have a look at. The 4th thing is fun. The kids with the best outcomes, their parents have a lot of fun working on communication skills with those children. So let's pop this behind me. Language activity. So when I think of a language activity, it's pretty tricky finding something that's suitable for all ages. So I've got something that I think might work from about 3 years of age right up through to the teens. So the language activity that I'm going to suggest to you is to start off with pick and the goal. The goal of this is to learn new vocabulary. So for your child to acquire some relevant new words in their vocab and to learn to use a visual schedule. So pick a theme, and your theme could be anything that you would be doing anyway in a day with your child. So it could be baking, gardening, going for a walk to look at the lambs, having a painting session, teddy bears picnic, which I heard Zandra saying they had online the other day. And you want to select about 5 quality words that you want your child to learn. Now, we don't just want nouns, like the names of things, because it's really hard to start to form sentences with just a bunch of nouns. So we want to choose a bit of a variety of different types of words. So I'm going to show you an example of baking. And in this one, the words that I have chosen are help, eating, yum, in, and not. So we've got help, an interactive social word, eating. We've got a verb that pops up a lot every day. Yum, quite fun to say. In, we've got a preposition there, which is a maths type word, and not. Vocab is really important because the number of words in your child's vocab predicts their long-term language potential and their long-term reading potential. So if you really want something to focus on over lockdown, just getting lots and lots of vocab into your child is really important. The kids I work with, we will record the first 500 to say 700 or 800 words in their vocab because we want to make sure we're getting a nice broad vocab and they're retaining that. So how do we teach vocab? Well, children typically learn vocab through hearing the word again and again. So we want our students or our children with Down syndrome during this activity to hear your target vocab words again and again. So you're going to say them a lot, but it's not enough for them to hear the word. It's really important for our young people with Down syndrome who have visual strengths, more so than auditory strengths, to see the word to help them learn new vocab. So one way that they can do that is through being exposed to lots of signs. This is the NZSL website. There's an app as well, which I use a lot. And this is great because I can type my target vocab into that and it can pop out with a PDF nice and tidy that I can use. So before this activity, once you've chosen some vocab words, you want to print that PDF out and you want to learn all of those off by heart so you don't need to refer back to this again. The other thing that we can do is have a printed visual. And in this instance, I could suggest a callboard. If you have a callboard, this is a great time to use it. If you don't have a callboard, if you don't know what a callboard is, really doesn't matter. Pull out a A4 landscape piece of paper and draw 5 big boxes. Write a target word in each box, and then just do a little stick figure under that target word. And any sort of rough stick figures are fine. Our kids with Down syndrome generally have pretty good visual processing skills. And as you are using that word, each time you're saying that word over and over during that interactive activity, you want to be signing it as much as possible, and you want to point to it on the callboard. You don't have to do all of these at once. I'm just giving a few different suggestions so that different people will have something to take away. If you have an older child, a child who's already got a lot of language, and you're thinking, what do I do in terms of vocab? You can go online and Google Tier 2 vocabulary, and you'll find some really good examples of slightly more challenging words that are relevant to learning at school. Okay, visual schedule. So you might be able to see on there, I've got a visual schedule and I've brought it with me so you can have a look as well. So if you're up for it, if you want a little something extra in this activity, you could bring out and use a visual schedule with your child. These are really useful tools for executive functioning needs. And exec functioning is perhaps another webinar altogether in itself. But what we want to do in this instance is use it to help the child stay focused and attend, to initiate tasks. So they're initiating a task up here to carry through and to complete tasks. What I've drawn here is for our baking routine. This is my daughter, by the way, our model there, kindly helping out. And we've got spoon. So in this activity, you get the spoon first. So once we've got the spoon, she is going to tick it off, not me. She's going to do it. And then I'll say to her, what's next? And she'll go, bowl, and then we'll find the bowl. And as we work through it, she can tick off each of those items. And these drawings that I've got here, my little stick figures, these are enough. You don't need Boardmaker. You don't need any flash visuals to be able to do that. This is fantastic. There's a really solid evidence base around using visual schedules. And if your child gets used to using them over lockdown at home, they're going to be much more successful at using them in other contexts, like at school, where there's also more distractions, and they might not have the same motivation that they have at home when it's really fun and really simple. So these are certainly something that you can consider using at home. These activities are all around, I need to get a laminating machine. Feel free to email me. I'm so happy to send you the file to print out one of these, and you can print them regularly, and you can just, draw on it with a pencil or whatever, that's fine. So the focus of this one is around input. I'm not asking her to sign or to use the word or to use the callboard. I want really good quality input so she can hear and process and retain these skills, and then the output happens further down the track. The next thing that you want to think about, if you can, and again, like I said earlier, just add whatever is easy for you and whatever works for you. But I don't think I would want to be doing this every day, because it does take a little bit of preparing for the adult. So what if we get a little bit more mileage out of this and do something to make that language stick? Can you keep a visual record? And for me, that means just having my phone handy and snapping a few photos as we go. If that feels like you're juggling a little bit too much, you could try setting an iPad up in the corner of the room and recording the whole thing, and go back and then take screenshots from the iPad. So the next day, what you've got is photos of your activity. You can print them out, you can pop them into a book, you can write in those target words again. Mine again were help, eating, yum, and not. And anyone else in the family who picks up that book, they don't need any training. They'll just start to use those. They'll use those target vocab words again and again naturally. If you want, you can print the signs on the back. There's evidence to show that learning from a printed book, a printed resource, has more mileage, is better retained than from an online book or an online resource. So if you're up for printing it, that's fantastic. Another option you might want to consider is going online for Book Creator, www.bookcreator.com. I love it because I managed to use it and I never read the instruction manual. And for me, that is good value. Thank you, Sarah. There's the website. You can get 40 books for free on that. And I will drop photos into that and I can make a book that my child, my student, can then just flick through themselves and revisit in their own time. And again, I want my target vocab words written in that book. It also has the option for a voice recording, and it shows a little symbol the child can press on. So if you've got key phrases as well containing your target words, they can hear those again and again. Let's have a look at my notes. Yeah, okay, so that's our activity that you might want to try at home. Hopefully that makes sense. Chop and change everything. There's not really a right and a wrong way to do it, as long as it's enjoyable for you and your child. That's the important thing. And feel free to ask some questions about that.
Amazing.
Right.
Thank you so much,
Sarah.
Fiona. Thank you very much.
Sarah?
Yes.
I pop in just with a quick question. I just noticed that some people, the sound went off and they didn't hear your 4 tips that you suggested, Fiona. That would be really good. They just heard some of them, and I wondered if you could just repeat those before we go into the Q&A.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Sandra. 4 tips for my students who are my most successful communicators, closest to reaching their communication potential. What I see in their parents. And when I say parents, I'm actually referring to whoever the lead adult in that child's life is. So first of all, those people assume the unofficial role of team leader. They learn, they upskill, they support, and they bring the team together. They invite people to work with them, collaborate, communicate, and they're engaged and they're really empowered. So the parents' approach to the whole team definitely makes a big difference in their children's outcomes. They do access public and private speech therapy. The services are very slightly different in what they can offer. I think certainly having additional specialist private speech therapy in the early years, 1 to 7, is really quite crucial for our children. Home practice, the third one. The families who do really well, they put aside at least 5 minutes of home practice and make that part of their everyday routine, just like they might reading a book. So it's not left for teachers to work on at school or other contexts. And the fourth one is having fun. The families who have a lot of fun learning, helping their child to learn to communicate, their kids are the most successful communicators.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Great idea to just recap those for anyone who missed any of them, and just always good to hear things a second time. So we've had a lot of fantastic questions coming in. Everyone using the Q&A function brilliantly. Awesome stuff. I'm going to start with one that is close to my heart because I have one inside my mouth at the moment, and that is, do you have any opinions or any information on palate expanders for kids with Down syndrome? Now, I just want to say that I have one in right now. If you don't already own a NutriBullet, buy one. That is my advice. But now I'll pass over to Fiona for some actual expert advice.
My daughter's just had a palate expander put in as well.
Season.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay. It's a big question. As a speech and language therapist, it's not something that I can answer with an area of expertise, because I think with palate expanders, that would be a good question perhaps for an orthodontist. But I do think having that high arched palate relative to the shape and size of the mouth, I can imagine that it might make a little bit of a difference. Children tend not to necessarily change the way that they talk unless they have targeted speech therapy. So I don't know if it would perhaps change a child's clarity, but it's certainly worth having speech therapy after that to see what the renewed potential is at that time. Is there a particular question with regards to palate, like the palate expanders? What about them specifically? Are you just wondering about the effects of having them, or if it's a good idea?
While we wait for the person who asked the question to add something further, I will just say that it's, I joked to people when I first got it in that I have given myself relative microglossier, something experienced by a lot of people with Down syndrome, because that is exactly what I'd done. I'd reduced the amount of space inside my mouth for my tongue. And the side effects of that were significant. So if you already have relative microglossier, then introducing that again on top, yeah, is definitely something to consider. So the question asker was wondering if it would help with clarity. So yeah, I see what you're saying. So so would having a palate expander, while leading to obviously short-term challenges with clarity, as you can hear, might have longer-term benefits?
Yeah. If the difficulty with clear speech was that children were not able to make their tongue meet the palate, then yes, I think it would make a big difference. But the thing with children with Down syndrome and speech clarity is there are so many different things that come into that. They have articulation difficulties, they have speech error pattern difficulties, there are voice difficulties. Fluency pops up as an issue in nearly half of kids with Down syndrome. Dysarthria, which is sort of just weak musculature. There are so many different things that contribute to that. And a big one is expressive language and knowing what words they want to be using, and motor planning as well. Something we call apraxia, where the child thinks of all the sounds they want to use before they actually get to the point where they're saying them. So considering how many different things are having an effect on children's speech, I would suggest no, I don't think a palate expander would make a big difference, but for children where there's a really, really narrow palate, it might make a little bit of a difference. Your point about microglossier, I think, is also important. There have been instances of where there have been changes in the mouth, and that sometimes had a detrimental effect. Following a situation maybe about 10 years ago, you know, often tonsils and adenoids, when those are taken out, it's only done partially. There's a few changes that happen. So I think it's probably always worth running something like that past the pediatrician before taking the next step.
Thank you so much. And actually that, just while we're talking about clarity, that leads us on to one of the other questions, which was, I'd love to know any tips around improving clarity. So some of my daughter's sounds are produced with a nasal sound, such as SF, which makes it harder for others to understand her even as her sentences grow.
I'm just writing the question down. How to improve clarity? Okay. The easiest way to improve clarity is actually to have a speech language therapist do a full assessment, because speech in kids with Down syndrome is the causes are multifactorial, and it does tend to be really complex. And some of the programs we're putting in place are very highly researched, and they are carefully structured and individualized to that child. So that's my first suggestion. If it's not possible to do that, then the number one strategy I would suggest that people can use is something that we call recasting. Recasting is copying back what your child says, but with a slight improvement, and doing it in a natural way so that it doesn't make them self-conscious or slow down the pace of the conversation. So if a child says, for example, da instead of star, oh, da, you can say, oh yeah, look, a star. Oh, I saw the star. Star. And just repeating that in a nice, clear way when the child has your attention.
Thanks, Fiona. Just a little note, the questions, I may not put the questions to us in order. That doesn't mean that we won't get to them. So yeah, just don't worry if you feel like you've been skipped. So yeah, so that yeah, leads us on. There's a couple of questions in here about stuttering. Stuttering or going too fast. Someone says we have signs, etc., to encourage our child to slow down, but any other tips on stuttering are appreciated.
Stuttering's an interesting one. The jury's out on that. And I was looking up at the research around that recently, and it shows that most children with Down syndrome who are just fluent are probably what we call clutterers. So they do tend to repeat the first sounds or the first syllables of the words, but we get this saying it all at once, this collapse of speech, and so it doesn't quite make sense. Anything we can do around pacing is usually quite useful. So first of all, we want to minimize the processing demands so that the child can concentrate on producing clear speech. And it's not asking them to do too many things at once, slowing it down. Visuals, I think, do help with cluttering. If they've got something they can look at to help them, for example, pictures they can make a choice from, then that might help them to organize what they want to say and then speak more clearly because they've got visuals to look at. I don't know that it helps to have pacing boards. It's something that we've looked at in the past where you're getting the child to tap as they're talking. I think signing does help because that helps them to slow, that gives them something to concentrate on and organize themselves. It seems to happen with time. It seems to improve a little bit with time. I think working on syllables is really important because we get that word collapse, which happens in cluttering disfluencies as well. For example, animal might come out as ammo. And if we can get animal, then that's going to make it much easier for people to understand them. And so that syllable awareness is something that I start really early on. You know, babies, 1-year-olds, they're not too early for some work on hearing all the syllables and words so that they can then produce them.
Yeah, there's another question here about saying multiple syllable words as one syllable. Did you have any sort of specific tips around that side of things?
For that one, I think focusing on the input is important and just making sure they have lots of opportunities to hear the syllables and words. Children do really well with big motor and sensory type learning. So if I want a child to learn multi-syllable word like animal, tapping it out is quite a good thing to do, but maybe we can get bigger than that. If it's a child who loves lots of simulation, putting them on a swing and pushing them, mo, so they're starting to hear the syllables and sequence is good. Maybe they could walk single file along a thin curb and they're counting this. They're saying one syllable for each step, and that's challenging their proprioception and their balance while they're practicing the syllables. That can help it stick a little bit. Or maybe laying out lily pads across the floor and they can jump out the syllables. And as they get really familiar with hearing them, then further down the track, they'll start to use those syllables.
Fantastic. There's a couple of questions in here about having a dual diagnosis of Down syndrome and autism. So, for example, one attendee has said that their person is 5 years old, good at pointing to pictures for what he wants, but says very few words and not consistently. We're going to start using a core board. Are core boards particularly helpful for children with that particular dual diagnosis, would you say?
Yes, definitely. Core boards are fantastic if you know how to use them.
Right.
With autism and Down syndrome, I mean, a lot of the resources that we use for kids with Down syndrome, the evidence base comes from children with autism. There's a lot of crossover, and visuals are really, really useful for both populations. They're definitely a go-to. The core boards are a little bit weird, and I've been pulled up for using that word as an inappropriate word, but I think they're a little bit weird until they are normalized and they're used by the whole family, or they're used by groups of kids at preschool, or they're used throughout the class. And we know that in preschool, certainly at school level, core boards tend to be rejected by kids unless they're used class-wide. So core boards are a great way to learn language, certainly from early on. For a child with 1 or 2 word level type speech, we want to introduce it in a way that's sort of naturalistic, how you'd normally introduce language with a baby, really simple to start with, repetitive, playful, lots of modeling. But if it's for a child going into school, you really, really want that used with lots of kids. in the classroom, not just the child with Down syndrome.
Yeah, fantastic. And I've heard of some really awesome classroom environments where core boards become part of the whole class's routine, and most of the other students aren't aware that it is specifically for any one child in the class because they've been introduced so well and so inclusively by the teachers and teacher aides. So they think, oh, it's just, you know, what we do in this classroom.
Yeah,
and there's,
so brilliant.
Which is encourages everyone to participate, I think.
Yeah.
While we're talking about that dual diagnosis, someone's asked for advice in approaching both public and private help in this area, and this might be somewhere where Xandra, you and I might have a bit more information. Part of it will depend on where you live. For example, in Auckland, there's an organisation called Disability Connect, which runs quite a lot of helpful things for the autism community specifically, but which can have a lot of positive crossover for dual diagnosis. Yeah, in terms of public and private help, I mean, obviously, if you're thinking of speech therapy, then please do apply to the UpsideDowns Education Trust if you haven't already. Do you two have any other kind of further suggestions?
I was going to say for younger children, it's important to find out where the early intervention centres are, because you can link into those as well and you'll be able to access that. I know there's often waiting lists, unfortunately, but that is another option. Not everyone's aware of them. So there's one in Wellington, and there's one in Christchurch, and there's one in Hamilton. So they are worth connecting to as well. And yes, absolutely. Please phone Sarah.
Yeah, and they've just responded to the Wairapa, which I believe is part of the Manawhaikaha area. So I hope I'm not wrong about that, but Manawhaikaha, if the Wairapa is within that catchment, then that's a really great place to head.
They're not actually at Mid-Central region. It ends just before it goes up to about Dannyburg. So Mid-Central is a place to go as well. But families would say in our area as well that it is a challenge to find people that are available to do speech. Yeah.
Well, I mean, certainly I know we have speech therapists that service our members in the Wairapa. So if it's speech therapy in particular that you're looking for, yeah, definitely apply for UpsideDowns if you're not already a member or on our waitlist. And if you're struggling to find a therapist, email me, sarah@upsidedowns.co.nz, and I'll be able to help you with that. So we've got a question here, which I do get asked fairly frequently, which is, what is the best age to start speech and language therapy? Is it too early? Is it too late? What's your take on that, Fiona?
Yeah, well, better late than never for starting speech therapy. And it's relevant for all ages, for children of all ages. I would suggest really, really early on. We're talking within the first few months of life. Private speech therapists usually have a bit more capacity when the baby's young to be able to intervene and work with kids, whereas in the public system, often they're not able to pick them up and offer quality intervention until a little bit further down the track, like when the child's 2.5 or 3 or 4. If the child's under child development, sometimes feeding and issues like that will take priority. So really good quality speech language therapy, specialist therapy early on is great. We can get really good mileage out of therapy in a baby as young as, say, 3 to 6 months of age. And that's not just Down syndrome, that's any children with language needs. So booking in early, the therapists who are quite experienced in this area, chances are they have long waiting lists. So you might want to get involved and pick someone and start to form a relationship with them. But certainly even like a 6-month-old baby, parents can start to learn effective strategies that are relevant at that time, ways that they can interact with the baby to enhance their listening and attention skills, to help the baby really pick up on sounds and units of speech that they need to be able to later start producing. They're already acquiring vocab, they're already starting to recognize signs and pair those with words. So there's a lot that happens in those babies. There was an amazing study. It wasn't kids with Down syndrome, but this was in babies about 3 months of age, and they got mums, popped electrodes on the babies' heads, and they got the mums to babble at the babies, just looking at them, ba, 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 chatting away. And the babies were like this, just nothing, just staring. And the electrodes showed that all of speech motor cortex in the brain was lighting up. So although babies had no responses that the mums could see, they were practicing all these different babble sounds in their heads. So certainly from 6 months of age is a good time to start. I wouldn't be seeing a 6-month-old every week or fortnight. It would be a little bit more spaced out than that, but certainly getting in early is really helpful.
Awesome. And that's good to hear, because that's a familiar expression.
Yeah.
I was going to say that when my son was really young, we started with speech therapy, and we didn't go all the time, but what we did do and was really beneficial was we'd meet with speech therapists, look at what we could be doing, and as parents, what we should be doing, learning about turn taking and working on certain things and games we could just add into our daily routine that was quite natural to do, and certainly believe that it's really very beneficial.
The other thing I just want to add to that is, if you've tried something with your child, you've worked on speech or it hasn't worked, or they haven't liked the core board, or the visual schedule was a failure, that happens, it's absolutely fine. But consider coming back to it again a year or two later, because different kids are ready at different stages, and there might still be some real value in that for your child.
And I'll just jump in as well and say that in terms of UpsideDowns, our applicants vary in age. So we fund up to the age of 21, and we have applicants at literally everything between not yet born and 18, 19. So yeah, there's a apply at any stage up to 21, I'd say as well. So one of the questions is, so yeah, what I guess on while we're talking about age a little bit, someone who's got an older child, 28, and speaks very little, knows everything you tell him, and now and again vocalizes the lyrics and songs he likes, and is a happy chap. It's almost like he just can't be bothered to talk. And again, this is something I hear a lot from parents of children of lots of different ages. Like the sense that, yeah, they can't be bothered, that it's there, but they can't be bothered. Hopefully have some advice. I guess you can't be the only one like this. So I can tell you right now, definitely not the only one like this. I hear this a lot, particularly with young men. That seems to be where I hear it. Again, that's all anecdotal, but Fiona, do you have anything on that?
Well, I only really work with kids, but I guess can't be bothered. Speech is so efficient. Being able to talk is a really easy, efficient way to get your message across. And it's so normal. It's culturally accepted. There's a big drive for people to talk. However, for a lot of people with Down syndrome, there is just so much processing that comes into play when they're trying to talk. It's really, really hard work organizing, thinking of the words in the right order, trying to turn it into speech, making sure that it's clear, and then getting the voicing at the right time. You know, some children will whisper instead of talking, and that might be because actually turning the voice on and off during speech is really hard. So chances are for that person, just spoken language is effortful, and it's just not quite worth that. So it might be that he's a bit more likely to chat if there are less distractions around him. I know with younger people, sometimes in clinic where there's no distractions, I'll chat away, and I'll say to the preschool teacher, how are you finding your language? And she'll say, I never heard more than one word at a time, and I'm hearing 4 or 5 word phrases. Excuse me. And I think it's just, there's so much going on. And there's so many extra demands on that person that sometimes we lose the speech in the face of that. But expressive language is however they can get a word across. So for him, if he uses a spoken word, great, but wherever possible, you want him to have access to being able to sign a word or being able to point to a visual to communicate. And of course, there's speech generating devices available as well, like on iPads, things like Touch Chat, where you can press a picture and there's a spoken voice that comes out. And that's another bridge towards encouraging young people to talk as well.
And there's kind of a couple of questions that are in that field that I'll ask you in a second, but first, a quick and easy one. Are your applicants all over New Zealand for UpsideDowns? Yes, they are. We have members in every region of Aotearoa, and you can become a member no matter where you are in Aotearoa, as long as you are in this country. And we don't care about your citizenship status either, by the way. Chuck that in there. So just kind of linked with that, Someone's asked, even though kids with Down syndrome are visual learners, does screen time impact their learning adversely, particularly at a young age, which seems like a very relevant question for lockdown.
Wow, screen time. That's a really tricky one because a lot of us parents, me included, are a little bit dependent on screen time for sanity. The American Academy of Pediatricians has recommendations around screen time, and for babies, for littlies under 2 years of age, the recommendation is none. And from 2 to 5 years of age, the recommendation is a maximum of 1 hour a day. So even when I'm talking about things, I know, what?
Lockdown. Sorry, getting out.
Yeah. So even things like me talking about using Book Creator, you know, there's value in it, but how much of your child's daily screen time is that going to take away? There are no apps that are ever going to substitute the value of just sitting down and playing with your child. There is so much that goes on behind the scenes around that child's holistic learning and brain development that's really, really useful. So I tend not to use screens in the preschool years at all. I might introduce a song, a wiggle song, and they might watch it once on the screen, and then I get rid of it, and then we sing it, and they've got the memory of that. I might use Spotify sometimes if I want a child to practice their auditory skills, their listening to nursery rhymes or to basic stories. But yeah, I think we need to be wary with screens because that mainstream advice still applies. And of course, there is research to show they learn more from printed books than from online books. So I just really want to encourage parents to not be too excited about new apps and so forth that comes out. You are your greatest teacher for your child, and you don't have to do anything but be an engaged parent to be successful at that.
Speaking of teachers, this is a really interesting question, and I think it is relevant for hopefully a lot of our attendees here. We have an SLT that goes to my son's school for a 30-minute session weekly. The teacher aide follows the tips that the speech therapist suggests. So what if the team leader, to use your metaphor from before, in my son's case is me and his TA? I try and do as much as I can to encourage speech, but the school environment is also where he can improve his communication skills. And I really like this question because it's actually the same thought that I had when you were talking, is that, you know, it does take a village, and especially when school is back on, there's a lot of different people, there's a lot of different moving parts, and that can be tricky to negotiate. So.
In my experience with teachers tend to be very highly skilled and very busy, but also very interested in the child with Down syndrome. And if they see that what the speech therapist is putting into place and the child is working on, if they see that that has a positive impact on the child's well-being, how they're functioning in the classroom, their ability to learn, and especially if those tools are already up and running, then they tend to use them. If I think for a parent, walking the talk yourself at home is really important. So carrying out activities at home as well, and maybe even occasionally sending video snippets through to the teacher to say, oh, we're doing this. And often when I do that, teachers will take the lead and they'll say, oh, actually that will work well in my classroom. The rest of it, no, you can keep that, but this I'm going to do. And so I think respecting and assuming that the teacher can step up and take on some of those things is really useful. I think it's fine as well to suggest if there's some relevant training programs, like the Auckland Down Syndrome Association runs the biannual Success in Schools program. And that's amazing for giving teachers lots of great ideas that they can use in the classroom. The main thing,
like shout out to all the teachers and teacher aides who are attending.
Yeah, absolutely. But the main thing about being a team leader is being a really good communicator and finding a positive way to bring everyone in together. And that's where the IP meetings, the IEP meetings are really important for everyone to get to, and for the parent to come prepared in advance. So what are your questions for the team? What do you really want your child to be doing? And I think if a parent's clear about that, they bring it to a meeting, then the school's able to respond to that. Another person professional that I've found is just amazing is the specialist outreach teachers. So they're really great at picking up on all the activities and the resources that I've provided, and then teasing out to work out what's going to work best in that class, and working alongside the teacher to make that happen. Senkos as well. Senkos are great to have on board.
Absolutely. More to give Fiona a bit of a breather than anything. There's a question here about, in Christchurch, we're finding and hearing from other families that it's difficult to find a private SLT who works with people with Down syndrome who's not already fully booked. Is this only in Christchurch, or is this a common issue nationwide? Do you have any suggestions on how we might find additional SLTs who work with people with Down syndrome, or how we might get in front of SLT students? So my response to that is it's not only a Christchurch issue. It affects everywhere in the country at different moments. Supply and demand is all over the place. But yeah, so sometimes you'll find speech therapists struggling to find people in certain areas, and then it will be another area's turn for that to happen, because these are individuals, and there's only so many qualified speech language therapists in the country, and sometimes they decide to move closer to family and things like that. But it is very rarely insurmountable in my experience of working with families all around the place. So my first suggestion would be to email me. I think this person is a member. Forgive me if I've got that wrong. But do email me, and I can help you with that. There is very rarely a time where I can't link you with someone. There's also a couple of workarounds. So for example, rural families in particular might do alternate in-person and Zoom webinar type sessions, and this enables you to see someone who might be in Temuka, for example, if you're on Christchurch or something. It's a terrible example, more likely to be the other way around, isn't it? But that kind of thing. The other thing that some families do is they buddy up with another family and they do sessions together in pairs. It's not quite individualized, but it's obviously significantly better than nothing at all, or a much larger group. So there is that. Also, I'm aware that we only have another 5 minutes. We're definitely not going to get through all the questions because there are many. We'll get through as many as we can. The session is supposed to finish at 8. We will stick around for another 10 minutes. If you have to leave at 8, go for it. The session is being recorded, but we'll push it out another 10 minutes. But after that, I'm afraid we really will have to stop. But we will hopefully be doing this again. So I'll make note of your questions, and hopefully we'll get to as many as we can. So this is one again I'm hearing come up quite a bit. We're getting a lot of loud yelling, screeching, and clicking sounds a lot of the day. Sorry, that was 3 words that were hard for me to say, which makes it difficult socially. Any advice? And I'm sure difficult for everyone's mental health during lockdown as well.
So if the child's making a lot of loud noises, driving
And
everyone a bit crazy.
Sounds.
And clicking sounds, yeah. Yeah, it varies so much as to why that's the case with different children. And I guess maybe one way of looking at it might be the ABC model, antecedent behavior consequence. Antecedent being what's happening immediately before they do that, or more broadly, what's the situation at the time? Is it a self-calming technique because they're feeling a little bit overwhelmed? Is it a stimulatory technique because they're feeling a little bit bored? And then you've got the behavior, and what's the consequence? Is there some sort of reward happening around that? They're getting attention. Is the hearing okay as well? Children sometimes get louder when they have difficulties with hearing. It could be linked to executive functioning challenges and just regulating their voice, regulating their behavior, and social skills even not quite registering. Actually, the other kids aren't doing that. They're a little quieter. So, typically we tend to gravitate towards the norm in the room. So maybe just a brainstorm session of looking at what's happening and why. The big question is why. Why is that happening? And anytime I get stuck with therapy, that's usually where I find the answer.
Another interesting one here that again is a relatively common one for us is my son is 3.5 years. Against most recommendations, I haven't taught him sign, just a few basic signs: eat, / hungry, drink, finished. I cannot get him to say any of the words I have taught him with sign. He's highly motivated with food and garden, so he's been saying a lot of those words, including garden, for over a year. I'm still not convinced that sign is the way to go.
there is a reasonable evidence base to show that if we want children to use a spoken word, they are more likely to learn it and then to use it if they've learned it visually and auditorily. So if they learn a word through sign, they are more likely to use the spoken word than if they don't learn it through sign to start with. So when I keep a record of children's vocab, once we're ticking those boxes of receptive, we'll teach a word in speech and sign. And when they come back next time and we go through that vocab checklist again, the words that they learned to sign the previous time, now they're saying. And the words they didn't learn to sign, they're not saying most of those words now. So I haven't yet had an instance where it hasn't been helpful for kids. We do know also that children with Down syndrome can be exposed to lots of different languages, and it doesn't harm them any more than other children, and different modes of language. So the more different types of language that we use with kids, signs, visuals, words, the more that they've got to draw on.
That's interesting, because there's a question here about bilinguality as well. What's your view of when a child is bilingual? Because this person's child is learning to say a few words and sentences in the mother's language as well as, I presume, English. So yeah, so your take is that that's not detrimental at all. That's just awesome.
So good. So good. Today, all of it. Yeah. No, they
Can
really
I just add in there, when my son was young, they said because there was, global delay in speech could have happened, they suggested we didn't teach him. We didn't do bilingual. So we stopped. We'd been doing it and we stopped. And he's learned now, as he's got older, he's just naturally wanted to learn. So although he's not fluent in Italian, he can still speak Italian, and he had a real interest. And it's one of the regrets I had, that I never gave him the option to really learn both languages.
It's hard.
Yeah.
Back on the sort of dual diagnosis thing a little bit. Someone said that my daughter's 13 and I'm wondering if she might have dyslexia. Do you have any experience in dealing with this? What sort of approach would you suggest for that?
So 13-year-old girl with possible dyslexia.
Yes.
To make quite a generic statement, and yeah, I think I'm safe saying this, many young people who have dyslexia haven't been taught reading via best practice models. And we know now through the evidence that that's a systematic, structured, phonics-based approach. And certainly for our children with Down syndrome, there's a huge amount of sound awareness, phonological awareness that they need to be able to succeed with reading. And the kind of activities that they need to be able to do is to hear. So forget about the letters and the visuals, just to hear the first sound in words. They need to be able to notice how many syllables there are in words. They need just the basic skill, matching letters and their sounds together. So there's a whole sound awareness component that a lot of our students will have missed. So if a child has a diagnosis or if there's a query around dyslexia, I would start by going back and going, actually, have they been exposed to all of those foundation skills, and can we revisit those skills and then see what happens? Reading is not a visual skill. As long as you can see, that's all you need visually for reading. Reading essentially is an auditory skill and it's a language skill. And so again, I'd be going back and looking at the auditory skills, sound awareness, phonological awareness, and their language levels first and foremost.
Well, while we're talking about reading, there's another question. Do you encourage parents to teach their children with Down syndrome to read at the age of 2 or 3 to improve their children's speech, as Professor Sue Buckley, Saint Sue Buckley, I think, recommends? We use this technique. This person said that they had good results of that by using that technique, as well as the use of sound cards, which I'm going to come on to after this as well, and that their speech is very good as an adult. So do you recommend that as well?
The See and Learn program, Sue Buckley has designed that specifically for kids with Down syndrome, and there's an evidence base around that. Literacy has a huge evidence base in itself, and what I'm finding more and more is all the strategies that work for the other kids out there, they work for our students with Down syndrome as well. So teaching kids to read at 2 or 3, yes and no. the same stuff is important for the kids with Down syndrome that is important for the kids who don't have Down syndrome. And the big thing is sound awareness and phonological awareness. So hearing rhymes and words, noticing first sounds and last sounds, and hearing all the different syllables and words. If they have that skill, they're going to be much better set up. The research shows that in terms of flashcards, just holding them up, flashcards, we can remember a few of those, but kids who retain a lot of flashcards and learn words that way, they already have those phonological awareness skills, and they do use them. So if you've got a child who quickly, you know, you hold up a word and they say, oh yeah, that's not, they've actually used that phonological awareness skill of decoding the word at some stage, and then they've retained it. So you can hold up flashcards for littlies. Maybe that might learn the names of the family or a few other words, but it is really, really essential to teach those underlying foundation skills. What we see otherwise is the child does really well with their reading at school, and then they get to about 7-ish, and then they plateau, and then they fall away. And we realize actually we haven't got the basics in place.
Mm-hmm. That's answered a couple of other questions in there about those techniques, but someone else has asked if you've seen improvement in communication with children that use LAMP. I don't know what LAMP is. No.
Oh, LAMP. Yeah, no, I won't answer that one. I'm vaguely familiar with it, but not enough, no.
Fair enough. So this is an interesting one, and again, probably one that is more relevant during lockdown because you're with your child 24/7. My daughter's a week off too, and she avoids saying the words she does know. There's only a few, but she'll sign for cracker, but I try not to give it to her unless she says the word. Sometimes works, other times she'll go without the food. I'm trying with other foods too. Is this okay?
If everybody's happy and having a fun time, I think it's fine. We do know that if we put pressure on children to say a certain word, they are less likely to say that word. They're more likely to hold back a little bit. So we want to create opportunities and enthusiasm. You might hold it up and pause for a moment and wait just to see, or you might give them a packet of crackers and it's closed, and hand that over and pretend to be doing something else. So that creates a drive for the child to say it, but we're not actually saying, come on, say this, say this. We want it to be natural. We want the child to have loads of exposure. We want them to be able to communicate and use expressive language in a way that works for them. For that child, she may be at the stage where pointing to a picture of a cracker is easy for her to do, and that will be a nice bridge to talking further down the track. She's still quite young. There's room for, I'm sure if she's at that stage, she'll be a talker. It'll come.
So we've probably got time for about 2 more questions. I'm just going to squeeze in, and then we will have to wrap up. And so we have got through as many of them as possible, and thank you so much for putting them in. Someone says their son is 4 years old and also hard of hearing. We're finding it difficult to keep his attention and practice listening. Do you have any tips on how to keep a child's attention and encouraging a spoken language response? So our primary communication is NZSL. They're trying to encourage a spoken language response.
Okay. So to get the child's attention and listening, the parents, I don't know, chances are they might have had an opportunity to do something like the Hannon program. There's a lot of Hannon trained therapists. Ministry of Ed often offer that program, and I would suggest signing up for it if possible. Or another one is Autism NZ runs a program called Way to Play, Neil Stewart and Tanya Catterall, and it's not for kids with Down syndrome, it's for kids with autism, but it's fantastic for teaching attention and listening skills. So to teach that, I would just focus on lots of fun and lots of play, where the play involves looking at a person. One thing that can work well is going into a bedroom, nice big king or queen size bed, no toys, not even any books, nothing. It's just you and me having a great time hanging out together. And that's going to mean there's lots of people play and lots of looking at faces. Once you're looking at faces, children start to process more and they attend more. And you might find you're getting only a tiny bit of eye contact at one stage, but as it becomes more fun, that builds incrementally over time. To get more speech for a child with hearing difficulties, again, my focus would be on input, making sure that we're reducing some of the distractions, reducing the background noise. If there's hearing difficulties, that auditory signal speech will often be a little bit muffled. And even if it's corrected now with grommets, hearing aids, whatever, they won't have had all that previous quality hearing exposure. So have periods when you turn off the TV and you turn off the radio, use really simple language at the child's level, which is meaningful to the child, lots of pauses, and make sure they're getting really good quality language input. Then they're more likely to start using the words with their speech later on.
For sure. Just a quick clarification before we move on to the final question. Someone who is a TA has been recommended to use flashcards for language, and they're now worried that this is not a great technique. So just to clarify there, is, would you go against that recommendation? I'm not sure who the recommendation was from, but would you go against that recommendation to use flashcards?
Flashcards for what, I wonder?
I'm presuming in classroom work, given that it's a TA.
Yeah, I use flashcards a lot, but it depends what it's for. And with any activity, my question is, what do I want the child to learn right now? What is this? Sorry, I'm getting feedback. My voice is jumping back at me. What do I want the child to learn right now? If I want them to learn fluency and really rapid word naming and reading, then yes, maybe I'm going to use sight words. If I want them to learn that basic skill of decoding words and they're not yet consistently matching sounds and letters, or they haven't yet got that skill of being able to pick up the first sound in words and know that the shape on the far left is where you start, then I'm probably not going to use flashcards for that purpose.
Awesome, thanks for clarifying. And we're going to move on to the final question. I'm really sorry, there's so many great ones, and I personally could do this all night, but we probably shouldn't. Not everyone's as much of a nerd as I am. So, but no, it's been absolutely fantastic. And Fiona, my goodness, you're just extraordinary. So the final question, before we let Fiona have a long drink of water, is any tips or strategies for teens or adults, and actually I would say in general, for younger kids as well, who have gotten to a certain point and you're wanting to extend, any tips or strategies to encourage further language and conversation skills? This person's clarity, speech clarity is mostly really good and easily understood by unfamiliar people, but try to encourage more adult conversation. So it's not just about the speech, but the sort of the deeper concepts and things like that.
Just having those conversations around young people with Down syndrome is so valuable. Professor Sue Buckley, she said that with their young people, they realized that they were picking up on topics that in theory should have been above their cognitive and language potential. They just shouldn't have been able to get. So our young people do pick up on issues. I think the priority is probably around finding topics that that person's interested in. And sometimes, there might be someone a bit older who's still loving the Wiggles or whatever. So finding a little bit of balance and meeting them halfway, I think, is useful. Other ways of engaging them. Modern tools that other teenagers use, I think it is good to bring those in. We can bring in IT for our older kids, and maybe they can start using WhatsApp. Maybe they can start using voice dictate and sending text messages to people, or maybe that's a way they might enjoy communicating with their parents. So looking at how other teenagers communicate, looking at topics that person's interested in, and just extending on those a little bit maybe.
Fantastic, awesome. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to Paul for doing our technical side of things. Thank you to Xandra for helping organize it and being part of it. Enormous thank you to Fiona for giving us her extraordinary expertise for such a long time and this evening, and answering quite an impressive range of questions. If your question wasn't answered, please do email me, sarah@upsidedowns.co.nz. Some of those questions are specific ones to do with our service and other services available that I can really quickly answer. Others I will forward to Fiona. But yeah, no, really appreciate all of you for coming this evening. You will be sent that survey so we can get a bit of feedback from you guys in terms of if we do this again. You'll also be sent a link to the recording. So don't worry if you feel like you missed something or you want to go back over it again. Great. So yeah, thank you very, very much, everybody. I hope you had an interesting and informative time. Good luck with the rest of your lockdowns. Stay safe and well, and looking after yourselves as well as the literacy goals of your children.
And can I just say on behalf of everyone as well, Sarah, thank you so much for doing all those questions and for helping setting it up. Really, it was great to work with you, and thanks, Fiona, and everyone out there. Enjoy your evening.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your enthusiasm. So, wow, amazing community out there.
Yeah, you guys are awesome. Look at these thank yous coming to Down syndrome community, best. We're going to stick around till everybody leaves for a second. We're just going to stick around for a couple of seconds. I think that was right. But yeah, have a lovely evening.
All righty. Thank you, Sarah. Take care. Thank you everyone. Bye, Sandra.
Bye. Thank you.